Okay, so Gary writes in
Mm.
with something rather interesting. He and his wife are artists in the Cotswolds,
Oh,
painting quirky studies of animals and oils.
very
They've
nice.
built a loyal following, moved from village craft fairs to more serious retail, and now they're wondering how to make the climb into luxury.
Oh,
His question is quite sharp, actually.
oh.
What's the one thing that they mustn't lose if they're to be seen as luxury? And
Mm.
second, because they sell directly to collectors rather than through galleries, are they damaging their legitimacy, or is client validation enough?
Ooh, I really like that. I like that he's put the question kind of that way round. It's not like, what should we do to become luxury, which you hear and we get a lot, but what mustn't we lose? Which tells me that they're already kind of understanding something about the whole thing.
Yes, I would agree with that, and I think
Okay.
the answer is authorship. You know,
Okay.
the visible hand of the artist. If you're I suppose if your work ever looks like it could have been knocked out by a factory in Hong Kong, you're finished,
Mm.
isn't it? Because,
Mm.
collectible art is anchored in integrity. You can recover from a bad season where you didn't have any inspiration or whatever. You can even fix your pricing. But
Mm.
I think once people think that you've lost that authorship,
Mm.
that you're just producing for the market, you're never going to be seen as luxury, are you?
That's exactly what my father used to say about bacon because he absolutely loathed him, and he said he basically said he was painting wallpaper for nihilists, but even then,
Okay.
I know, right? It's a bit savage, but there we are. He admitted though that the one thing that you couldn't deny was that you would never mistake bacon for anything else. You know, that's
And this is it. Whether you like Bacon or not, the work has his hand and his mind
right,
stamped into every inch, right?
right.
Art, I suppose, at the upper end doesn't need universal adoration, does it? It
No.
requires that people believe it couldn't have come from anyone else more than anything.
Right, which is why Gary's subject, animals in oils, is both, I think, probably an asset and a risk. I mean, it's
Yeah.
wonderfully distinctive, but if, it could so very easily slip into twee if they ever kind of stop guarding that eccentricity, right?
Yes, I think precisely that. The
Okay.
moment it feels like gift shop rather
Mm,
than studio,
exactly.
you're
Yeah.
done. I still remember this ghastly Labrador prince, one of my father's incredibly wealthy friends,
Hmm.
gave my mother. So she hung them between a Hockney and a Turner just to piss off my father. And those dogs actually looked like they'd been bred for tea towels more than anything else.
I remember that. Didn't she keep them up for like months just for her own amusement?
Absolutely, and to prove a point that money doesn't equal taste.
Right.
Which I suppose brings us
Mm.
neatly to galleries, doesn't it? Because
Yes,
that's
yes.
that's Gary's second question, really. Do you need
Hmm.
galleries, or can your collectors carry you? And I suppose the truth of it is, if you want legitimacy
Mm.
with a wider audience, you need galleries at some level, don't you?
Right, but not forever though, right?
No, no. I mean, galleries are a bit like Michelin stars. They don't teach you how to cook necessarily, but they signal to everyone else that you can. So
Right.
I suppose a carefully chosen exhibition,
Hmm.
a show with the right
Mm.
curator or an appearance at a fair with the right neighbors, those things act as credibility events. So they let strangers say, oh, this is serious. And,
Yes.
and I think without them, you're whispering to people who already like you. And with
Yes.
them, you're suddenly in the room with people who wouldn't otherwise have given you a second glance.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly what Visson did with artists, right? That
Right.
nobody needed Kasama Dots or how do you say it, Paul?
Murakami.
Murakami's flowers, right? To sell, I think
Hmm.
I've only ever read that one, but there we are, to sell handbags. But you've got like contemporary art collectors buying Vuitton and Vuitton collectors buying Murakami, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just fashion.
Right,
Tiffany did it with designers as artists. So Elsa
right.
Peretti and Paloma Picasso. Bulgari brought in Zaha Hadid.
Mm,
And, Hermes have been doing it for decades with the carré scarves as artist collaborations. So each one
yeah.
is signed, credited, and documented. And it's the same kind of psychology that Gary needs to think about.
Yes.
So, he's saying our oils are eccentric, but they're not craft. They're not
Yes.
twee. They're authored works that are placed in contexts that make them serious.
Right. And the placement matters more than people will ever admit, right? That
For sure.
remember, do you remember that I think you know where I'm going, that private view that we sneaked into, that one it was in Cork Street, I think.
In Cork Street?
Yes. Yes.
Yes, I do remember. I seem to remember
Oh
that you
God.
nicked 3 glasses of champagne and then nearly knocked over a Henry Moore maquette.
Paul Russell. You're not meant to give away. I'm not confirming nor denying that ever happened. That's it. But look, my point is, aside from champagne and statues and things, half the people there weren't looking at the, well, I certainly wasn't looking at the art. They were looking at who else was there. And that context is half the work, right? And that's what galleries provide.
Right.
Right.
And I think you're absolutely right. And I think, which is why the advice I would probably give to Gary is this: keep selling directly. It gives intimacy and control. But borrow the gallery world occasionally. Do a
Right.
couple of exhibitions, ideally in spaces that collectors respect. Not a scattergun approach, not anything. Just because it has white walls doesn't mean you need to do it.
I
So
mean,
you have
right.
to choose carefully and treat those moments almost like stamps on a passport. Because
Yes.
afterwards, you can go back to your collectors, but now with added legitimacy.
Right. And those collectors, they're going to love it because then they can say, oh, it's like, teenagers that knew a band before it was famous. We were
Right.
here before the gallery. We knew this band. And, that in itself, just on its own, that's social currency.
Oh, yeah, it is, absolutely. And I think the one thing that they must never lose is authorship and integrity, and the one thing that they must add sparingly is institutional validation. And that's how you climb from being, I suppose, charming to being luxury.
Right. Because it's not really different from what our grandparents did with the whole family collections, is it really? They loaned out the
Very
Renoirs and the
similar.
Constables out to exhibitions every so often. And they're not trying to sell them or anything. They're just trying to keep names in circulation, right?
Yeah, that's true, although I don't think they do it anymore,
Don't
insurance
they?
or something. No.
No.
But it was a way of saying, we own this, but
Yeah.
we also belong in that conversation, that conversation of experts and collectors. And I think Gary and his wife need to do the same thing, keep their oils in the hands of collectors, but send them out occasionally into the wider world to remind people that it's serious art.
Right, absolutely. And then avoid the trap of thinking that a waiting list alone is going to make you luxury. Because
Right.
people will happily wait for a Drek if it's fashionable, right?
So true.
Right? Luxury requires that they wait because it's you.
Yeah, absolutely. Make it worth waiting for, and then
Yeah.
ration the waiting.
Right, which sounds suspiciously like Peregrine's wine cellar. Half, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Half the
do.
bottles are undrinkable, but they're completely rationed all the same, right?
You're so right. Were you there when he tried? This is just an aside. Were you there when he tried to pass off a claret that had turned almost to vinegar as an acquired taste?
I mean, yes, and and this is you threw me under the bus, I'm throwing you under the bus. If I remember correctly, you drank it anyway just to be contrary. Not like you at all.
Yeah, I did, because he claimed it went better with the grouse.
Yeah, of course he did.
Yeah.